Great, we're live. So welcome everybody to this latest Agilysis webinar. We'll just give a moment or two for attendees to make their way through the lobby as usual, and we'll keep admitting them in the background to facilitate as many as possible getting in. We've got well over 100 people registered for this webinar this afternoon, so hopefully we'll have a decent number joining us and participating. I imagine, looking down the list of participants who are with us this afternoon, that most of you have been to one of our webinars in the past, but if you haven't, just to give you a little bit of background. So this afternoon, myself, I'm Dan Campsall, chairman here at Agilysis. I'm joined by Tanya Fosdick, who's our research director, are going to be walking through the results of some work that we've done along with a whole load of other stakeholders and supporters in the road safety community on trying to understand current capacity to deliver a safe system. And we'll get into that in a little bit more detail in a second. We like these webinars to be participatory where possible. So there are a couple of ways in which you can engage with us in the course of our discussions this afternoon. In Teams, on the toolbar across the top, you've got a button that says Q&A, and I assume it's on the top. Sometimes in browser versions and that sort of thing, these things move around as they do. But yeah, if you've got a Q&A button and at any point this afternoon there's a question that you would like to ask of us, or indeed, want to sort of pose to the collective group more widely, please use the Q&A button there. The other thing that you can obviously do, most of you will be familiar with the chat function in Teams, and the conversation doesn't just need to be between us, but actually you are welcome to engage in some dialogue with one another. We just ask that you keep it civil, and this is a professional conversation around some of the issues that we're trying to grapple with as a sector, and invite you to engage with one another around those issues. If you've not participated in any of these webinars in the past and you want to go back and look at content from previous sessions, then if you just go to agilysis.co.uk/content, then you can also access previous recordings from there as well. So we've got stuff on 20-mile-an-hour limits and various other topics and themes that we have engaged with. Please do go back and look through some of that content if it's going to be of use to you. But on with the show this afternoon, we're going to be talking, as I said, about the Safe System Capacity Survey and revealing the results of survey work that's happened over the last few months across the sector, seeking to understand how the road safety community is engaging with Safe System and developing in its capacity to deliver against the principles of the Safe System. So, but before we get into those results, we want to make sure that everyone's kind of warmed up and engaged and participating. So we've got a couple of questions to ask at the start. So Steve's just going to fire up Mentimeter, which I'm sure many of you will be familiar with. It works in Teams, so you don't need to go out to an app. It should just work on the screen for you. You get a little side panel alongside the slides as they show, well, that says slide with heading, so that's a poor design feature on my part, I think. But as Steve has also put in the chat, you can join at menti.com. All you need to do is enter the event code and it will take you to these questions as well, and you can join on mobile or in a browser, etc. So thanks, Steve, for removing my the heading that I'd left in there. Let's go then to our first question. So this is something that we'll come around to a little bit later on, because a lot of the participants who responded to the survey this year and indeed in 2022 talked about the fact that they were engaging with significantly with road safety education. So we thought it'd be good just to find out which groups you are engaging with, and then it might inform some of the conversation a little bit later on. So this is multiple option, multi-choice. You don't have to just select one answer. You can select from child pedestrians, child cyclists, adult cyclists, young drivers, older road users, driving for work, equestrians, motorcyclists, and others. And you can select all of them or none of them according to your engagement within that education process. So loads of answers starting to come through. Look at that, thick and fast. Fantastic. So motorcycles have leapt into the lead. Interesting to see decent numbers who are doing stuff on safety with equestrians. But yeah, young drivers, child pedestrians, sort of emerging there alongside motorcyclists, a little bit on older road users, child cyclists. Fantastic. Okay, I'm just going to give that a second or two longer. We've got 70 attendees in the session, and I've only got responses from about 35 of you. So I do hope that you haven't just kind of put us on in the background and you're busy working away and not engaging with the question. But let's get a couple more responses in there. Fantastic. Good. Okay, let's move on to our next question then. And for those who are engaged in road safety education, can you just drop in a couple of words to describe the sorts of things that you are doing in terms of delivery? So I've put a couple of options in there, things like workshops, classroom, on road. There may be plenty of other things that you're doing, theatre and education, other sorts of campaign activity. But once we start to see some words appear, then we'll develop a bit of a word cloud around that and get a sense of the different channels that are being used to engage with this as well. Look at that, starting to populate quite quickly. Schools and social media coming out, sort of loudest, if you can have loud with words on a screen at the moment. A little bit on road, schools, classrooms, some workshops, e-learning, mode shift stars, bikeability in there, workshops, digital magazines, cycloparks, theatre and education, theatre coming in there. Wow. Huge array actually of different ways in which people are engaging with road safety education, and I think we'll come back to that a little bit later to talk about sort of what we mean by education and its place within the safe system. Fantastic. But last couple of questions before we move on. So next one, Steve. One of the things that we did this year, which was different to previous years, was we opened up the survey to groups who were outside of the public sector. And we wanted to just see what the relationships were like between quite a lot of the charity respondents that came in and participated in the survey this year, and a lot of those who were working in other institutions. So we just thought it was worth exploring this question of if you're not a charity, do you work with charities and NGOs within the sector? And then in a second, we'll ask the reverse question for those who are not charities to see how you respond as well. Fantastic. Okay, now let's flip the question, Steve, and let's ask it the other way. So if a charity, do you work with public and private sector agencies on road safety? I think when we discuss some of the partnership arrangements, some of this will start to come through. Obviously, a significant number of people on the call are not from charities, as we might expect, especially those working in within statutory bodies, but just worth seeing how the balance sort of shapes up between those who are working with and those who are not working collaboratively with the NGO and charity sector. Fantastic. Okay, that's really helpful. Gives us a little bit of a sense of who's in the room and actually provides a little bit of detail on some of the questions that we've been asking within the survey as well. So we're going to leave that there, and then I'm going to invite Tanya to come and present some of the headline results from the Capacity Survey 2023. And as we go through, we'll pause at points to discuss. But as I said right at the start, please do stick your comments in the chat or start to fire in questions accordingly, and we'll pick those up as we go. Tanya, over to you.
Fab, thank you. Hopefully my slides are now sharing correctly. So before we start, I want to do a big shout out to our colleague Sam Scott, who has done all the analysis for this presentation this afternoon. I'm really hoping he's on the webinar, so if there are any super tricky questions, he can help to answer those. But yeah, thank you, Sam, for all the hard work here. I'm not going to take the credit for it. Right, let's delve in. So this is our second year of running this Safe System Capacity Survey. I'm hoping many of you who are on the call today participated in it, which is why you're so eager to get to the results. So we first ran it in summer 22. And the idea really behind this is to kind of get a state of play on where we are with the safe system. So it's something that's spoken about a great deal, both in the UK and elsewhere. But how ready are we to apply it? How well equipped are you and your colleagues to think about working on the safe system? So we want to understand how you're all doing, how your partnerships work, how your funding arrangements are, what the strengths and vulnerabilities, the challenges you face are. And then we can start to think about how we can collectively work together to build safe system readiness in the UK. So it's about understanding how we can develop capacity and where the attention needs to be. So as with last year, we were supported by a wide range of actors, stakeholders from across the road safety sector who have helped to disseminate this survey. Without them, we wouldn't have been able to get to you all. So thank you once again for all of those who have helped us out. So just kind of want to go back to where we were last year with our baseline survey in 2022. So we very much concentrated on organisations within the UK who had a frontline delivery role. And I'll come on to what we're doing a little bit differently this year in a moment. But the idea is to really focus this first round last year on who has got kind of statutory duties, dedicated responsibilities in the road safety sphere. And what we found last year was actually we've got lots of stakeholders who really do feel they're benefiting on, there are benefits to delivering on the safe system. And that there are things like local authorities are doing, like IRAP programs, which are really helping them to concentrate their work, undertaking critical reviews of local speed limits, for example, or prioritising vulnerable road users in road design. So there was all sorts of really good stuff going on that we revealed last year. What we also found last year was actually there was a real perception that we haven't had strong leadership in road safety for quite some time, and that lack of guidance has been hindering progress for safe system delivery. Now, at the time we presented this last year, we were actually waiting for the strategic framework. Let's not say too much on that right now, but about where we are just over 12 months later. But yeah, we definitely felt at that point that people wanted support and there was a real requirement for some leadership. The other thing that we learned last year was that people were starting to think about how they could develop safe system strategies, but actually, and building capacity in road safety to align with other co-benefits. So how could they team up with other policy agendas in order to kind of make the case for road safety, linking active travel and improving air quality? But it allowed, kind of tapping into other stakeholders' budgets and resources in order to kind of move forward road safety. And then some of the other things we found is actually, yeah, there really was a recognition last year that we were going beyond the 3 E's, traditional 3 E's within road safety, of engineering, education and enforcement, to really start to think about how we tackle standards, training, legislation, research and other elements. And we'll come on to those when we look at this year's results as well. Did feel a little bit last year that actually it's very easy to tick off actions under safe roads, safe road users and safe speeds, but we weren't necessarily going into post-collision response and safe vehicles as much as we perhaps could have done. And actually that there are a wide range of different tools which the safe system offers that were not necessarily being tapped into. So again, this is something that we'll explore in this year's. And one of the other things that the first survey revealed, that people really saw the benefits of strong governance, that targets and measuring performance through data collection, particularly through safety performance indicators, was a real benefit to them. Being able to demonstrate effectiveness obviously allows us to justify what we're doing, and that brings resource and support with it. So that's where we were last year. In 2022, just wanted to kind of look at where we are now. Oh, something very strange has gone on with that slide. Have you got it showing strange as well, Dan?
I don't think that slide should be showing at all.
Oh, okay. Yeah, not sure what's happened there. Right, well, I will quickly just flip over this just to say that we had 530 people attempt this survey this year. And of those, 43% completed it. That's exactly the same as we had last year. So we had 178 people who actually continued and completed it. So it's very much the same as last year. What I'm going to do is I am going to skip that because it's just a very strange slide, but we did open it up to other organisations, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But before we talk about those new organisations, let's look at who some of the people in the room that I can see that will have participated last year as well, and kind of compare where we're at in comparison. So local authority participation, you can see on here we had 33 local authorities from 9 different regions who took part, with half of them having more than 5 people with a dedicated role in road safety. Now we asked that dedicated role, that's actually slightly fewer than we had last time. So there's a slightly lower percentage of people having bigger teams, which is interesting. In terms of budgets, respondents were far more likely to say that their levels of capital funding had increased than their revenue funding, and this was the same as last year. The roles and the regions is pretty much the same as it was last year as well. So it's good that you're coming back and you're helping us by answering these questions a year later. What we did have in some of the free text was some new insights which were really interesting, particularly related to 20 mile an hour. And as Dan said, we did a recent webinar on this. It's a very much a hot topic at the moment. And one of the things that was found was actually that funding for 20 mile an hour rollout is often guaranteed, whereas there are constraints on other road safety activities. So it feels like this is something that's being joined up with active travel and other environmental initiatives, and people are really quite serious about 20 mile an hour implementation. Whether or not that's to the detriment of other interventions, yeah, that's probably worth unpicking. But it's interesting to see that kind of money for 20 mile an hour is ring fenced and is there, that is of interest and of importance to people. Thinking about areas of focus, so these are broadly the same as last year. So the most common activities are road safety education, analysis, working on schemes and bids, active travel promotion and engineering. And we'll come back to a discussion about education based on your Mentimeter responses in a little while. Police forces. So we actually had slightly more police force participation this time round, but however fewer reported any increases in funding overall, and I'll show a slide on funding in a moment. There were several comments from police force participants who said that their contribution to road safety is actually very much linked to the partnership, and this is where they see funding being available. And I think that's quite interesting in and of itself, that it's kind of that reliance on traditional road safety partnerships allowing police to do activities, whereas perhaps traditional roads policing sat separately is less common right now, which is obviously of a concern. So again, this is the areas of focus. Fewer respondents said that they had a role in roads policing enforcement than in the baseline survey. So that's reflecting what I've just said there about partnership. But otherwise, the areas of focus are pretty much the same, with many talking about the fact that they engage in road safety education. So we had 6 respondents in total from 4 fire and rescue services. We would really like to get more fire and rescue colleagues involved in this in the future. So we'll have to see about which channels we can use in order to get this survey out. Many of the respondents were managers as well. So again, getting the idea, the views of those more operational frontline staff would be really beneficial. As with the police force responses, partnership funding again was often pointed to as the main means of funding, and this was a theme that came out last year in the baseline survey, but actually it was more commonly cited this year. And again, that's a bit of a concern, that there's a reliance on these central local budgets and not particularly from the organisations themselves. And once again, this is the fire and rescue areas of focus: community safety, emergency response, and road safety education, sort of level pegging for those who responded. We also went out to partnerships, asked those to be involved, and we had around the same level of involvement as last year. And actually, we had some really interesting themes start to emerge in some of the free text responses for partnerships, talking about safe system strategies and how this has really enabled them to secure more long-term funding by joining the dots in different ways with their partners, and kind of being able to present the business case for more money. That this was really positive. That actually by penning their actions around safe system and the strategy in particular, it's allowed them to tap into those co-benefits and other public health concerns. So this is obviously something that is the partnerships are leading the way on, and perhaps that's why the police and fire are able to tap specifically into those through a joined up response. We also had transport authorities responding. So these include organisations like National Highways, Transport for London, Transport for Greater Manchester, and Transport for West Midlands, as well as the devolved governments in Wales and Scotland. Not a great deal has changed since last year for these groups. They were slightly more likely to say there were decreases in some of their available budgets, and actually the increase in costs of delivering things like engineering projects do make delivery much more difficult than perhaps it was 12 months ago. So coming on to funding, what we've got here are kind of net directions of either decrease or increase in funding for both capital and revenue for the different groups. This picture is pretty similar to last year, so the patterns for local authorities are the same. Last year, the police reported increase in both capital and revenue budgets, which is not seen here. So there's the net change in capital is, there is 0. There's slightly increase in police revenue this year, but it was much more positive last year. Conversely, the decreases reported by fire and rescue services last year are not present to the same extent this year. So perhaps it's coming back to that partnership element. And again, like last year, the partnership revenues, last year partnership revenues were reported to be a net decrease. So something here has happened with partnership funding to be much more positive. With the transport authorities decreases, these were not as large as last year, shown here. So there have been some small differences.
Tanya, just before you move on from that slide, I just wonder whether it's worth us sort of pausing to reflect on that a little bit. I know that within the partnerships, obviously the revenues that they've got to play with are often generated by diversionary education courses through the UK road endorse type schemes, and that actually participation in those has been increasing, which is quite an interesting trend. Might be to do with, you know, sort of some of what we've seen in terms of increase in speed of traffic, post-COVID, availability of courses online and that sort of thing, which might be feeding into some of that funding. But I'd also be really interested for other participants on the call, just in the light of last week's autumn statement, where obviously some of us will have benefited from a reduction in national insurance contributions, but questions being asked about what the long-term impact of those decisions in fiscal measures are going to do for local authority expenditure. So if you want to write in the chat and tell us what you think might also be coming down the track for you, that would be really interesting, because it might be something that we could pick up in next year's survey to see whether actually some of those projections, some of those challenges that you might think are coming in terms of local authority expenditure are realised. Because I know that, you know, there's huge concerns out there amongst many local authorities at the moment over future of funding. There's no way it's keeping pace with inflationary pressures, and yeah, please do just start to contribute in the chat with any thoughts that you've got about what might be likely to happen to funding in the future.
Certainly Nick Cowling,
yeah,
he's picked up on that very much so, yeah. And yeah, not only just inflationary pressures, you know, social care costs as well. And so, you know, we're not doing road safety in a vacuum, are we? And we always have competing pressures at the local levels as well. So yeah, and Paul says that revenue's been static since 2010, so it's effectively reducing. Yeah, lots of people here now talking about those revenue funding pressures. So this is certainly something, you know, it's pretty stark when you look at the far left-hand side of this table, haven't you? That you know what people are, you know, the environment in which people are trying to operate, which perhaps means that the work that's, you know, a safe system approach is even more relevant than ever. The idea that we need to work collaboratively and systemically so that we get the greatest benefits through our schemes, be they engineering, education, standards, whatever, that we all come together is probably the best thing here, because otherwise the local authorities are really going to be struggling to do it on their own. Great. I can see a few more bits and pieces going into the chat there, but let's
fine.
move on.
I'll keep an eye on that. You keep pressing on with presenting the results.
Sure. So let's move on to some of these new participants we opened up to. So this time we invited those from the charity sector and also and non-governmental organisations, plus other organisations, and I'll come on to those in a moment. We also didn't limit it to the UK, but what we haven't done is included those overseas participants in this analysis right now. So yeah, the charities really wanted to be involved. Last year, we've got quite a few people saying, you know, we are part of the system. We are trying to do our bit from road safety. How can we participate? So we made sure that we included them this year. Now, there were some particular charities that we actually got some really strong response rates from. So IAM Road Smart members, who are one of our kind of promoters, the IAM, definitely participated. Cycling UK, our AC Foundation, and Break for just to name a few. And really what we wanted to understand from the charity sector is how they're involved in safe system development, and also the key strengths and challenges that they see. So as you will see in here, we've got quite a few who are directly involved in campaigning and advocacy, and policy development, but also very much in the training sphere. And most of these charities are national charities as well. So yeah, it was really positive actually that we got so many charities involved, and that those particular ones really promoted the survey heavily to their membership. what we might need to do is think about how those large membership organisations get involved in future. So we want to get a representative view across many charities, and not just those who have got lots of good communications and membership participation, because obviously groups like IAM Road Smart, which is very much about training, are going to kind of skew if many of them are involved. So we do need to think about that, but it's great to hear their voices in here. Other organisations are those which didn't necessarily fit into other categories. So we had some private sector consultancies. Also, the offices of police and crime commissioners were involved, that they didn't really want to sit underneath the police. And actually, independent driver and rider trainers participated. So within these organisations, we wanted to understand the level of responsibility they felt they had in delivering for the sector. So do they contribute, or do they support? Very few felt they were kind of managing or leading on building road safety capacity, but that they did see that they very much had a role. There's a greater spread with these organisations between being local, national, and international, and undertake a wide range of different activities, from training and research to other activities, which included everything from fleet management, crash site investigation, policy and standards preparation, and road safety auditing. So an awful lot going on amongst those who are very important to the safe system, and kind of perhaps we wouldn't have been able to capture in previous years in other ways. So this is a bit of an interesting one, and related to road safety strategies. So we asked whether or not people were operating to a road safety strategy, and last time about a third said that they had an up-to-date strategy, whereas as you can see here, it's now up to about a half. So we can see some real momentum here in terms of delivering on local strategies. And I think this is something that we kind of wanted to pause and have a bit of a chat about, because I think this is quite striking. It's, as I mentioned a little while ago, we're operating in the absence of that national framework. What does this mean? Why, people are developing something locally. I'm wondering if it's a good or a bad thing.
Well, I mean, I think in principle, it's a good thing, isn't it? If people are wanting to engage strategically with how they prioritise road safety. I mean, just looking at some of the comments that are continuing to come through around funding, one of the things that people are saying is about how they continue to make the argument for investment in road safety. And, when budgets have been set, those get bitten into within the course of the year. Whereas if you've got strategic priorities, then especially where they've been bought into by, say, cabinet members and senior leaders, then it's easier to make the case for those things. But I wonder whether what we're seeing here is a little bit like, you'll be familiar with the technology adoption curve. So you get a few early movers, early adopters who probably 3, 4, 5 years ago, as we were coming to the end of any sort of national direction, started to say, well, we haven't got any targets nationally. We haven't got that strategic direction nationally. What should we do locally to be able to fill the gap that is there? And some went fairly early with the development of strategies. I think about, people like Cambridgeshire or Kent, who put those in place. And actually what we're then starting to see is that early majority now really come through, that a whole number of authorities have seen some of those trailblazers in terms of local strategy, recognize that actually can't afford to wait for the development of national guidance or a national strategy. Meanwhile, there's an imperative to deal with safety in communities and look to move that forward. So I think probably it's a good thing, but actually Rob Gifford's just asked a really interesting question, which is where I was about to go, which is, but how consistent are the strategies with each other? Because if you've got very everyone says it's a up-to-date, a safe system strategy, But if there's inconsistencies in the way that's being applied locally, then obviously that's a challenge for us. So I don't know whether you've obviously done quite a lot of work on strategy development around the country. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and that's why I asked the bad question, because I think that is the only downside is that we have, you know, multiple different approaches and you know, different versions, potential cherry picking of what safe system is. So I do think that's the risk, and it would have been nice to have that umbrella framework in order to help people kind of direct what they're doing locally. From what we've been doing with the partnerships that we've worked with, it's always based on that international best practice, and the fundamentals will always be the same. We do have to say that we tailor, because each partnership operates in a different way, and so the funding mechanisms, the membership, the governance arrangements do differ from area to area, and it has to be a partnership strategy that works for them. Otherwise, it's just a nice thing that's on the website. And that's why we had to ask the question there of, yes, we have an up-to-date strategy, but we're not always adhering to it, because actually it's really easy to say, hey, we've got one, but do you work to it? So yeah, I think no, there isn't a framework, Rob, and perhaps there ought to be, you know, a template, because yeah, I do think there is a real risk that from region to region we'll have some disparity there, and that people will be moving at different rates. However, as you say, I think that the fact that we have so many strategies being developed, we know the benefits of having targets, how that helps to mobilize, creates debate amongst stakeholders, secures funding, taps into other policy areas. I think it's a really good move, and let's hope next year will be even higher percentage.
I guess just as a sort of follow-on to that, I mean, given the fact that we've now got, okay, there's a couple of things I was going to raise here. One is the people who respond to this survey are likely to be the ones who are perhaps more engaged in what's going on across borders and nationally, and therefore this might be slightly overrepresentative of what's happening out there in local authorities and partnership areas across the board. So it might be that it's not quite at the sort of 50% mark yet, but it indicates certainly a direction of travel. I guess the question I was starting to sort of grapple with is, if DFT do now sort of come out with a framework, what should our ambitions for that be, given the fact that we've already getting an awful lot of local direction being worked on? What do we think that a national framework could really lay on top of this that isn't already starting to be worked on at a subnational level?
Well, I think we'll possibly come on to this a little bit later with the support, but I think it's that leadership element which is going to be really useful. The idea that actually we're bought into this as a nation, and we're serious about road safety, and we're serious about using the safe system to improve road safety. I think that will help people endorse their own strategies locally, that they're doing the right thing, and it will be within those national, you know, that national scene, as it were. And as Hazel's just said, and the one thing we really would love in there is some national performance indicators, something which will allow some consistency of measurement, comparisons between regions, so that we can actually learn from one another and what works best, and you know, yeah, do the right thing, evidence-led interventions.
I'm not entirely sure whether Paul Copeland is trying to troll us with that latest comment in chat. I'm sure that it'll be real soon now.
Yeah.
I mean, Paul, if you know something that the rest of us don't, please do tip us off. But I suspect that you're just sort of tugging there.
And I can see a question between differences between England, Scotland and Wales, and yeah, maybe Sam might be able to answer that question for you whilst I continue talking. What I can say is that some wonderful consultants are currently working on the Welsh road safety strategy, so we'll see what that looks like when we've finished the work. Right, shall we move forward a little
Yeah,
bit
let's
on,
do that.
from strategies. And actually, we started to talk about targets and the importance of targets here. And I think actually this is where we are starting to get some consistency. So Vision Zero goals, yeah, 42% have got that, and a third have got that 50% reduction in death or serious injury by 2030. And actually only 10% have a different casualty reduction target. So that's a good thing. We have got some consistency there. So where people have got targets, and obviously you can have a Vision Zero target, and you can also have the 50% by 2030s, which is why these numbers, don't add up to 100. But 20% don't have targets. And yeah, that's interesting. And only 9% have safety performance indicators. And what's interesting there is that fewer, that 9% is fewer than it was last year. Again, this might be part of the increase in other organisations that we've got involved, that it's less of the traditional police, fire, local authority partnership, and because we've opened it out, this has changed the percentages we've got here in terms of whether or not a target is even appropriate. But yeah, so some interesting information in there. We also wanted to understand whether or not people were collaborating with road safety organisations in neighbouring areas. So this chart here has got a few pieces of information. So yeah, there are some areas where we've got little collaboration, and we think, kind of thinking about that coordination, economies of scale, consistency of messaging, and how we deliver a safe system approach. We could do with a little bit more collaboration here. So only a third said that they work really closely with road safety organisations in their neighbouring areas. And similarly, about a third said they're not members of a partnership. Again, many of those will be charities. Where people are members of partnerships, again, the usual suspects are there of local authorities, police, fire and rescue, and national highways. Interesting that 25% have got ambulance service at the table, when we've done a lot of this strategy work before getting some of the public health and first line responders in terms of ambulance charities has been a bit difficult. So it's really positive to see that they are in the room.
It's interesting to see with the question that we asked at the top of the webinar about engagement between charities and public sector organisations, that it did seem that actually for those many of the public sector organisations did feel that they were working collaboratively with charities, and if there were charities who were joining us on the call, that they were working similarly collaboratively in the other direction. So I think there is a bit of kind of engagement with civil society, but sometimes can be a little bit sort of uncertain about how to develop that relationship. I mean, I'm guessing that I know for a fact that in a number of the strategies and partnership reviews that you've worked on, you have got NGOs around the table. Any sort of sense of what tends to work quite well in terms of bringing them along on the journey?
Providing a specific role. So, I mean, I think some of the partnerships where we've got dedicated groups around the safe system, where we've got post-collision response being represented by road victims trusts, where actually there is a really clear leadership role within the partnership here. That works very well. So I think, it's the ones where they're not just on the board or peripheral member, but actually identifying what they bring to the table and specifying their role seems to really get them on board and keep them on board, I think, as well.
Talking of great charities working in the sector, PACT is on the call. Margaret Winchcombe is with us, and if you're not a PACT member, do consider becoming one, he said, declaring an interest as Vice Chair of Trustees. But Margaret's asked about the others. I don't know whether that's another one to sort of throw in Sam's direction, but looking at that list, most of the sort of main players that you would expect to see there around the table, who else are we looking at in terms of those others? Any idea?
No, I'm going to have to push that back to Sam, so he's probably
Okay.
furiously typing in the background and looking at the data sheets. It would have been an open question, so many of these questions we allowed people to pick other. So hopefully Sam will come back to us on that one shortly.
Great stuff.
Okay, right. Frustrations. So again, this is the kind of net agreement, disagreement with a list of potential frustrations that that they could pick from. And these results are really similar to last year. So funding, lack of support from government, and limited time and resources to deliver really came out very strongly here. What's interesting, one of the things we've picked out is that lack of data isn't a key frustration, but having supporting tools is. So there's a little bit of a potential mismatch here. Maybe people are, or maybe it wasn't supporting tools in terms of data that they're thinking about. But yeah, there might be something there in terms of having the practical tools available to implement. Actually, internal support really didn't come out here. So people felt that they were well supported by their colleagues, that their teams were understood. They had great support from partnerships. So locally we're working really well. But I think, as you can see here, it's pushing up again in terms of that funding and the government support that people really asking for. So last year, this was really interesting because we created a word cloud to show the results from this question. We just said, describe what the safe system means to you. It was, there was a real range of responses last year, but actually this year we found we could categorize key themes according to different organisations here. So from a Highways and Transport Authority's perspective, actually there seemed to be some quite good understanding of what the safe system is, the principles that we want to be avoiding silo working, that it's very much about, it's a holistic tool. They understood the principles. So that was really positive. Police and partnerships were quite interesting, talking about the role of technology and data in safe system implementation and that role of enforcement. However, there was kind of some areas where there was a lack of permeation of and prioritization of safe system thinking. So there's perhaps a little bit more work to be done in the police sector. The charities really came from it from a very different perspective. Kind of describing it as a label that doesn't affect operations. And when we started to unpick what type of activities they thought the safe system mean, there was quite a vague range. And again, a lot of it ended up concentrating on vehicle control and the protection of vulnerable road users. So it felt in our reading of their responses that perhaps understanding of what the safe system is and how they sit within it was a little bit limited. For fire and rescue services, more positively, it was very much about collaboration and creating those layers of protection. So a pretty good understanding there. So I think we've got a bit of a range there, haven't we, of how people understand what it means.
Yeah, I guess that's where I was going to sort of go in terms of questioning, really, is I think it's about the fact that our understanding of the safe system is at different levels of maturity according to some of the different actors in the system. What could we do or should we do to try and sort of raise the level? Because in a sense, this potentially indicates that that we're not all singing from the same hymn sheet, sort of thing, that there are differences in approaches, and that can potentially mean that we're pulling on or calling for resources in different areas, that there might be tensions in terms of operation of the system, whereas actually what we would want is a kind of fairly consistent view of what's going to deliver the best and most effective system from a safety perspective. So just interested in any sort of thoughts you got on that.
Yeah, and I mean, we've obviously spent the last few years upskilling those public sector organisations who have got that statutory duties. We've had many conferences and sessions dedicated on safe system practice. So I think perhaps it comes back to those early questions about how we collaborate with charities and the third sector. Many on the call say that they're doing it. Are they just organisations that are called upon as and when? How do we really embed them into these partnerships so that they understand their role and we're not kind of pulling in different directions, as you say? So I think there is some upskilling to do, but I think it has to be about how we communicate and how we also already collaborate. I don't know if I know the answer to that on how people work with, and I imagine charities, are engaged with at different levels at different times for different reasons. We've just had Road Safety Week. I imagine that's been a real time of collaboration. How that has then, kind of resulted in bigger discussions about training and kind of how people fit in. I don't know. Again, anybody on the chat have got any good ideas of how we might engage? Because obviously we're talking about many, many different stakeholders. We've got the charities themselves, but an organisation like the IAM, which is a member organisation, trying to get to all of its members across all of the country who are doing great frontline work. That's going to be a bit more of a challenge, isn't it?
I guess one of the other things that's sort of potentially indicated by some of these answers is a sense in which the when we start to engage with the safe system, what we start to think is inevitably we always think, what's in it for me, or what does it mean for me? And we start to think about our existing roles, responsibilities, activities, duties, and then layer on top of that something that is a bit more developed. So, we've gone from the engineering, enforcement, education stuff quite often being fairly sort of siloed to thinking, well, how do I start to make the role that I'm engaged with more integrated with what others are doing? And so we're starting to talk about it being holistic, avoiding silos, the role of data and intelligence in order to kind of prioritize activity that's more evidence informed. But yeah, I wonder whether these answers are indicating the fact that we're trying to move away from the old paradigm, the way that we have done it in the past, and towards something that is more integrated, but we haven't necessarily got there yet. And then I guess that sort of feeds into some of what's to come in terms of answers around actually what support do we need as a sector moving forward.
Absolutely, and I think it's about some of that shared responsibility element of it, isn't it? And community engagement, the role that actually the road users and road user representative groups have in this, and it's perhaps much more of it's previously been more of an exchange relationship. Perhaps it needs to be much more collaborative in the future. Yeah. Really conscious of time. We've got a couple more slides to go, so let's have a look at the next one. So with this one, we were asking kind of how people deliver on safe system in terms of the different levers available to them. So you can see here that people could pick multiple different elements. So things like leadership, coordination, research all came out highly. Investing in road safety activities. But the one which is way ahead is that road safety and education and communication, which is why we touched upon it at the beginning. And I think it really got us thinking, didn't it, about, well, does road safety education mean the same thing to all respondents? And I think perhaps that came out quite clearly this morning, that road safety education is a huge catch-all, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is. So, I mean, just looking at the responses, when we asked you to describe in one or two words the education activities that you are engaged in, we've got everything, social media, classrooms, bikeability schools, e-learning, lobbying, be a better biker, on-road cycling, various cycle training things, older driver assessments, mode shift stars, webinars, templates, roadside stuff. So it feels to me, and this has been one of the things that we've sort of pushed on a bit in recent years, is to say, what is education, or what are we using education as an umbrella term for? Because actually what we're trying to sort of put under there is a whole load of behavioral interventions. So actually some of what's come through there is we're using the term education to address training, which is different. We're using some of it in order to address kind of campaign type activities. We're using some of it to address advocacy activity. And so I think actually there's something for us to do here about breaking that apart, atomizing it a little bit more, so that we've got more of a sense of which organizations are engaging with which of those activities. I think it's something we can probably come back to in a future iteration of the survey, to understand actually how much different organizations say they're doing education, but actually they're doing things that are contributing to raising awareness, shifting policy, restructuring the environment, training road users, as opposed to all of that being described within the education piece.
Completely agree. And I think the thing for me is this with this survey is it always asks more questions. So yeah, we're on year 2. It's developed since year 1. It is not going to be the same next year, is it? Because we're going to want to delve more deeply as we move forward with it. So just thinking about some of the support requests that people asked for. So again, we had some free text which we've linked to the operators around the safe system. And what I've got here is I've compared in the chart the spider diagram in the middle this year and last year. And so we've got key themes in here which echo some of the frustrations. Actually, investment, leadership and coordination are all key themes. But there are some differences to last year. So standards and training and operation featured last year. But education, support in education is actually the one that's come out really, really highly this year. Again, I think that's probably reflective of some of the respondents we've had. But yeah, there are some differences here in kind of what people are asking for in terms of support. In the free text itself, actually toolkits and guidance is something that came up several times. Having digestible case studies, excuse me, that people can use to emulate, to work towards, or kind of almost a starter for 10 toolkit. And I think that's something that we as the wider sector really need to think about. How do those who are starting, who've just created their strategy, now go about doing and implementing? Where do they begin? So yeah, that's something that I don't know if we can answer today, but certainly something that collectively we ought to be thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that is being looked at in other places. So we're doing some work with Transport Scotland at the moment, helping them to develop something of a toolkit, as well as to think about the kind of culture and training that they need right across the landscape in Scotland. If I was in Glasgow yesterday presenting alongside George Henry from Transport Scotland on the work that we're developing there, and I think it might be worth us exploring that maybe in a future webinar about some of the planks that you need to put in place to develop the training, the capacity, the culture, and also the toolkits to be able to do this job and do it effectively. But again, it's something that I think we've touched on, certainly in the chat, the role of some of the professional bodies like CIHT and ADEPT and RSGB and others. This needs to be a collaborative effort. It needs to be something that works between organizations, so that collectively we're not reinforcing silos, but we're recognizing the value of collaborative response in these areas.
Definitely. Okay, last slide. Just wanted to touch on people's future ambitions, really, which are very much focused on the practical, quite similar to last year, but talking about establishing or improving partnership working, improving analytical outputs, as well as undertaking safe system training. And I've seen some chat about that as well, developing the capacity of their team and embedding safe system approach. So for those who have participated in this survey, actually some really good stuff coming out at the end, and we're all pretty positive despite the constraints. But there are things that people are really hoping to get to grips with and move forward on. And I think just on 3 o'clock, that's the end of the presentation and the slides. Yeah.
I mean, look, I think we've been trying to tackle some of the questions as they've come through and discuss as we've been going forward. So we're not going to run a sort of extensive Q&A time now at the end here, but we will be making these results available. You will be able to go to the website, agilysis.co.uk/content, to access this recording and share it with colleagues. What we did last year is we, after we'd had a bit more time to digest the results and explore them further, we produced a white paper which we then shared with the minister, DFT and DFT colleagues, to explore how actually these things can be supported nationally. And if you've got thoughts that you would like to express and, you know, sort of on reflection add into that debate, please do message us, and we will try and pick that up and reflect that in the reporting that we pulled together on the back of this. But I think our time is basically used up for now, and we don't want to overstay our welcome. So thank you very much to all of you who have joined us for this afternoon. Trust it's been useful and insightful, and that you valued engaging with one another as much as sitting and listening to us. And we will bring you more content in the near future. Early in the new year, we're going to have a whole series of webinars on updates to Mast Online, because we've been doing some fairly significant changes to that to bring you new analytical tools as well. And we look forward to seeing you shortly. So thanks very much, and stay safe out there.